Hi everyone, my name is Shazia Khan, and the unit we'll be doing today is academic and research skills for law, and it's learning outcome 2, which is to know how to research information using primary and secondary methods. We'll be watching a video on primary and secondary methods, but before that I want to identify what we did in learning outcome 1, so you've got a bit of an idea of a summary of what we did in the last session. So we looked at learning outcome 1, which was being able to assess our own academic competencies. We looked at our strengths and weaknesses, including a video on English language skills and the level of English someone will have. We set targets for improvement using the self-assessment. So we looked at the issue in regards to what self-assessment is. And why should students self-assess an effective self-assessment? We also looked at the issue of the purpose of assessment. So we looked at things like it's an advanced understanding of the subject. We looked at the planning skills for students, and it also increases learner autonomy. We looked at the role of the student in regards to the responsibility, taking their own responsibility on their own learning, how to identify and achieve their goals by teamwork, self-learning, monitor their learning over time, so reflective, megacognitive thinking and self-assessment tools. We looked at personal skills, which was quite an important personal skill, time management. We looked at the Pareto principle, 80-20, and why that was so important in regards to student learning. We also looked at how you would allocate your time effectively around your life, so time management in regards to that. We also looked at the personal skill of responding to change, and sometimes it's very hard. So we looked at the neutral zone, which looked at denial, commitment, resistance, and exploration. We looked at things like, if I ignore it, will it go away? That's denial. Commitment, that I'm going to just fail again. Resistance, another change. How much can I handle? We also went through personal skills in regards to the personal SWOT analysis. We looked at what the SWOT analysis is in regards to a business aspect, but also from a student's personal aspect, and looked at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats, and the importance of a SWOT analysis and your action plans to put in place. We looked at the importance of self-assessment and how it's so important in regarding having a picture of your performance and accomplishments, and how would you review your personal and professional goals. So anything that was short-term goals, which is usually under 1 year, and then long-term goals, which is 1 to 5 years, and how you would keep a record of all your work. We then went on to the SMART goals, which looked at the acronym of SMART, which is S for specific, M for measurable, A for attainable, R for relevant, and T for time bound. And we went through some examples of SMART goals. For example, if you wanted to achieve a higher grade, or if you wanted to read 20 minutes of the day. We also looked at the FSET, where you'd take the English test which has the official grids for the Council of Europe, which identifies your scale of English, so what level you are, which standard you are, and how you could achieve improving your standard by taking the test. Now we're going to look at learning outcome 2, which is to know how to research information using primary and secondary methods in research. And firstly, we're going to look at outlining the process for carrying out primary research from different sources, and also outline the process for carrying out primary research from different sources, both secondary and primary sources. But firstly, I'm going to go put on a video that you can watch in regards to primary and secondary sources. So this video we'll be watching is identifying what is primary and secondary sources and how it could be used.
Some kind of research project, dissertation, thesis, or or maybe you are studying marketing, you will probably need to know the difference between primary and secondary research sources. And today, I'm going to tell you what that is. If you're new here, my name is Dr. Hayley Stainton, and I am a university lecturer who's marked a lot of dissertations and research projects, so I'm giving you all of my best helpful tips and advice in this series of videos that's all about writing a research project. So the type of research source that we are all naturally more familiar with is secondary data. Now, secondary data is something that has been researched, is data that has been already collected by somebody else. So when you read an article in a newspaper, or you read a book, or a research paper, or most things you read really, they are examples of secondary data because you yourself did not go out and do any physical research. Somebody else did it. These are the kind of sources that we see most commonly in our everyday lives, and these are the kinds of sources that most of you have probably used throughout your course up until now. And you're probably watching this video because you need to conduct some kind of primary research. Now, primary research is something that we don't always do all of the time, and it is something that is new to a lot of us. But it's actually really simple. Primary research is essentially research that is undertaken by you. Now, this does not mean research on the internet, because that is doing research using secondary sources, because somebody else has already written that and you're just taking what's already there and putting it all together. Primary research is when you go out in the field and you do your own research or your own study. So it might be you doing surveys, it might be you doing interviews, you observing something, but you're not writing up something you've read, you're actually doing the research. So let's dig a bit deeper into secondary research sources. Now, there are lots of different secondary sources that you can use. This can include books, journal articles, magazines, conference papers, newspapers, videos, websites, dissertations, lectures, and lots more. But the important thing is whichever secondary research source that you use, you need to make sure that it is valid, a good, high quality source. So, what is a high quality source, I hear you ask? Well, a high quality source is probably not your random YouTube video that's made by a vlogger. It's probably not a blog. Yes, it could be a paper or a website by a big organisation that is trustworthy. So the United Nations, the British government, organisations like this. It could be a research paper that an academic has written because that is peer reviewed. There is a very rigorous process. It's actually very difficult to get your work published in an academic journal. So you know what is published, in most cases, is high quality. Now, one of the biggest examples I like to give is Wikipedia. So Wikipedia is essentially a wiki. And a wiki is a working document that anybody can contribute to. So I could go onto Wikipedia and find an article on, I don't know, how to build a spaceship. And I could start adding bits in, but I know nothing about how to build a spaceship. So that article is not valid because we don't know who's written it. We don't know if they're credible. So I strongly recommend that you avoid Wikipedia or any websites that operate on that basis. And this includes blogs. So for example, there are lots of travel blogs. So my specialism is travel and tourism. Let's say I'm doing a study on tourist motivations to go to Zambia. I might find some travel blogs that say why Zambia is a great place to go. Whilst I could reference them, they're definitely not the most credible sources because who is this blogger? How do I know what they say is correct and true? It would be much better if I went direct to the Zambia Tourist Board and used information from that, because that is far more credible. So what you really need to do when you are looking at secondary data sources is think, is this a good source? Another thing to think about is date. When was it published? Some topics don't really change, and it doesn't really matter when the year of publication was, but others really do. Let's say, for example, I say there are 500,000 visitors that go to this part of Zambia every year, but my reference is from 2002. That's not correct anymore, is it? That's 20 years old. So you need to think about when your reference was published as well. There are some sources that are kind of timeless. So for example, if I'm doing this study on motivations to go to Zambia, I might want to refer to Maslow's theory of motivation, which is a pinnacle theory in this field. It was written, I can't remember off the top of my head, I want to say maybe in the 70s. And that's a long time ago. But lots of people still use this model as a guide. So that would be okay. So you need to really use your initiative and assess it for yourself. Does it matter if that source is old? Does it not? Maybe I want to use that reference from 2002 about visitor numbers in Zambia and compare it to visitor numbers with a more recent statistic, and I could actually do the maths and demonstrate how much the visitor numbers have increased. That would be a really good example of being super critical and using my initiative and not simply just repeating what I'm reading, but digesting that and sharing that in a way that tells more of a story, that's more of an analytical explanation. Another thing that's a really good idea to do when you are looking at secondary research sources is to cross-reference. Now, if you don't know how to cross-reference, I do recommend that you check out this video that I've made all about referencing. It's a very comprehensive video, you can't go wrong. So do check that out. But if you already do know how to do that, I recommend that you do cross-reference. So this essentially means that you will look at multiple sources and reference multiple sources. So you might say, these 5 different authors all say the same thing. Or you might say, this author says this, but this author disagrees. That shows you've done lots of reading, that shows you've got good understanding, good topic knowledge, and it shows that you've put in a lot of effort, and that will help you to get higher grades in your work. Okay, so let's move on to primary research. As I said before, primary research is when you yourself are out in the field collecting data or collecting information. It has not been written by somebody else. There are lots of different ways that we can collect primary data. Some of the main ways include interviews, surveys, observation, focus groups, and there are lots of other examples too. Now, I do recommend that you think very carefully about what is the best method to collect data. So let's say I'm looking at, I'll stick with the same example, motivations for tourists to go to Zambia. I could do a quick tick box questionnaire, and I could say, here are 4 options, which one best describes you? And maybe it says, I'm going to Zambia to visit friends and family. I'm going to see Victoria Falls. I want to go on safari. I want to explore Africa. I could do that. Of course, a questionnaire is going to be a little bit limited because maybe that person doesn't really fit any of those answers. So I might decide actually an interview would be better because I can have a conversation with them and I can really get lots of information out of them. So really think about what it is you're trying to research and what would be the best way to get the data that you want to get. Also, what's the most practical too? Maybe I don't have the skills to interview. Maybe I'm really shy and I don't think I'll be very good at that. So then perhaps I explore questionnaires a bit more. For example, so just have a think about what would be the best research method for you. And if you are not familiar with the different research methods that you could use, then I do recommend that you stay tuned for my next video because the next video that I'm going to make is going to be on exactly that.
So as you can see from that video, we looked at the lady looked at primary and secondary research and the importance of it, and also the fact that you should be using sources that are valid sources and not things like Wikipedia that people can add to, and how to research your primary and secondary sources and what we tend to use when we're producing a research project. So 2.1, we're going to look at outlining the process for carrying out primary research from different sources. So primary research is information collected through original or first-hand research, as was mentioned in the video. It identified that primary research is specifically collected specifically for research purposes directly from participants. The objective of study defines whether primary or secondary data is to be collected, and an analysis can become easier as it is focused for your research. Primary research is a methodology research. Research is used to collect data directly rather than depending on the data collected from previously done research. Technically, they own the data. Primary research is solely carried out to address a certain point which requires an in-depth analysis. Primary research, an example of primary research is the fact that you are interested in the quality of vegan options offered at your campus dining hall. You decide to conduct a survey of vegan students, asking them their thoughts. Primary research is often used in qualitative research, particularly in service methodology, questionnaires, focus groups, and various types of interviews. While quantitative primary research does not exist, it's not as common. So primary data collection, in-depth interviews, it presents the opportunity to gather detailed insights from participants who have detailed knowledge, and you can guide the conversation toward your research objectives or follow an unstructured approach. These interviews can be conducted in person, which is face-to-face, or over the telephone. Interviews are open-ended method, which involves the dialogues or interaction between interviewer, which is the researcher, and the interviewee, which is the respondent. Conducting a face-to-face interview method is said to generate a better response from respondents, as it is a more personal approach. However, the success of face-to-face interviews depends heavily on researchers' ability to ask questions and his and her experience related to the conducting such interviews in the past. The types of questions are used in this type of research are mostly open-ended questions, and these questions help to gain an in-depth insights into opinions and perceptions of respondents. Personal interviews usually last up to 30 minutes or even longer, depending on the subject research. If a researcher is running short of the time conducting, telephonic interviews can also be helpful to collect data. The next one is surveys. Surveys are an excellent way to collect a large amount of information from a given population. Surveys yield the most meaningful data when they ask the right questions of the right people in the right way. Once conducted with pen and paper, surveys have come a long way since then. Today, most researchers use online surveys to send it to respondents to gather information from them. Online surveys are convenient and can be sent on emails or even be filled out online. These can be accessed on handheld devices like smartphones, tablets, iPads, and similar devices. Once a survey is deployed, a certain amount of information time is given to the respondent to answer the survey questions and send it back to the researcher. In order to get maximum information from respondents, surveys should have a mix of open-ended questions and close-ended questions. Surveys should not be lengthy, else respondents lose interest and tend to leave it half done. So, you want to get the person interested in what you are asking them rather than having it too lengthy and then they get bored. It is good practice to reward respondents with successfully filling out surveys for their time and efforts and valuable information. Most organizations or businesses usually give away gift cards from reputed brands that respondents can redeem later. Focus groups. A focus group can get a small group of people that fit your target demographic to provide knowledge about your research. The group's leader encourages honest, open discussion among participants. Focus groups is popular research technique that is used collected, like we said, from a small group of people, usually restricted to 6 to 10, and focus groups bring together people who are experts in the subject matter for which the research is conducted. Focus group has a moderator who stipulates discussion among the members to get a greater insight, and organizations and businesses can make use of this method, especially to identify niche market to learn about a specific group of consumers. Social media monitoring. Social media monitoring can help you keep tabs on candid conversations on your research area. Social media monitoring shows that you don't always need to participate in the conversation to learn from it. Another primary data collection is observations. And in this primary research method, there's no direct interaction between the researcher and the consumer being observed. The researcher observes the reactions of a subject and makes notes. Trained observers or cameras are used to record reactions. Observations are noted in predetermined situation. For example, a bakery brand wants to know how people react to its new biscuits, observes notes on consumers' first reaction, and evaluates collective data to draw inferences. So advantages and limitations of the research. Okay, so firstly, it can get more specific information. Advantages, data interpretation is better, greater control of data, updated data, and researcher can collect data at hand. Primary research has several advantages and over research methods making it indispensable. One of the most advantages, as we mentioned earlier, that is advantage is that data is collected at first hand and accurate. In other words, there's no dilution of data. Also, primary research focuses mainly on problem in hand, which means entire attention is directed to find probable solution to a pinpointed subject matter. Data that is collected in primary research, as we said, has greater control of data. So primary research gives means to control how data is collected and used. It's up to the discretion of businesses and organizations who are collecting data how to best use of data to get meaningful research insights. Primary research is also time-tested method, therefore one can rely on results that are obtained from conducting this research. Now, there are some limitations. So time-consuming and costly. And this is one may be required to spend a huge amount of money depending on the setup of or primary research method used. Not all businesses and organizations may be able to spend a considerable amount of money. Response rate may be low. Also time-consuming. This type of research can be time-consuming. Conducting interviews, sending and receiving online service can be quite an exhaustive process and needs investing and patience for the process to work. Moreover, evaluating results and applying the findings to improve product or service will need additional time. Requires experience to create data questions for data collection and analysis, and interviewer is biased. Sometimes just using one primary research method may not be enough. In such cases, use more than one method is required, and it might increase both times required to conduct research and the cost associated with it. So 2.1, we're now looking at outlining the process for carrying out secondary research from different sources. So secondary data is the data which has been taken from another source without the direct interaction. Common sources are market research reports, trade reports, books, journals, etc. Secondary data can be qualitative and quantitative data, and analysis can be cumbersome as it was collected for some other purpose. Secondary data has already been collected, as we mentioned, through primary sources and made readily available. it is a type of data that has already been collected in the past. A researcher may have collected the data for a particular project, then made it available to use by another researcher. Data classified as secondary for particular research may be said to be primary and for another research. This is the case when data is being reused, making it primary data for the first research and secondary data for the second research it is being used for. As we mentioned, some examples are books, personal journals, newspapers, websites, government records. Secondary data are known to be readily available compared to that of primary data. It requires very little research and needs for manpower to use these sources. Books are one of the most traditional ways of collecting data, as the lady identified in the video. There are books available for all topics you can think of. When carrying out research, all you have to do is look for the book on the topic being researched, then select from the available repository of books in the area. Books, when carefully chosen, are an authentic source of authentic data and can be useful in preparing a literature review. Government publication, as we mentioned, statistics, industry association reports, company websites, annual reports. These are types of secondary data, market research reports, books, as I've just mentioned, and journals. Published sources, there are a variety of published sources. The authenticity of the data generated from these sources depends majorly on the writer and the publishing company. Published sources may be printed or electronic, as the case may be. They may be paid for or free depending on the writer and the publishing company's decision. Journals are something that are gradually becoming more important these days when data collection is concerned. This is because journals are updated regularly with new publications on a periodic basis, therefore giving today information. Also, journals are usually more specific when it comes to research. For example, we can have a journal on secondary data collection for quantitative data, while a book will simply be titled Secondary Data Collection. Another secondary data research is newspapers. In most cases, the information passed through a newspaper is usually very reliable, hence making it one of the most authentic sources of collecting secondary data. Websites, again, the information shared on websites is mostly not regulated, as such may not be trusted compared to other sources. As the lady mentioned, Wikipedia, as you can add on to that. Diaries, blogs, government records are very important and are authentic source of secondary information. Other secondary information can be things like letters, radio stations, and public sector records. So we've got advantages and limitations of secondary data. Firstly, it's less time consuming, which is an advantage. Many sources to choose from, low resource requirements. It can provide comparative and contextual data, and you can get a large amount of detailed statistics. So most of the sources of secondary data are easily accessible to researchers. Most of these sources can be accessible online through a mobile device. People who do not have access to the internet can also access them through print. They're also usually available in the libraries. Another issue is inexpensive. Secondary data mostly require little to no cost for people to acquire them. Many books, journals, and magazines can be downloaded for free online. Books can also be borrowed for free from public libraries by people who do have access to the internet. And also they have institutions now provide e-books, which helps students. Time saving. The time spent on collecting secondary data is usually very little compared to that of primary data. The only investigation necessary for secondary data is the process of sourcing for necessary data sources. Generating new insights. When reevaluating data, especially through another person's lens or point of view, new things are uncovered. There may be a thing that wasn't discovered in the past by the primary data collector that secondary data collection may reveal. For example, when customers complain about difficulty using an app to the customer service team, They may decide to create a user guide teaching customers how to use it. However, when a product developer has access to this data, it may be uncovered that the issue came from the UI UX design that needs to be worked on. Now, some of the disadvantages, the limitations, is it may be outdated. It may be collected for other purpose and not specific to your research. Format may be difficult to analyze, and there's no control over the quality of data. The data collected through secondary sources may not be as authentic as when collected directly from the source. This is a very common disadvantage with online sources due to the lack of regularity bodies to monitor the kind of content that is being shared. Therefore, working with this kind of data may have negative effects on research being carried out. Irrelevant data. So researchers spend so much time surfing through a pool of irrelevant data before finally getting the one they need. This is because the data was not collected mainly for the researcher. Exaggerated data. Some data sources are known to exaggerate the information that is being shared. This bias may be some to maintain a good public image or due to a paid advert. This is very common with many online blogs that even go to a bid to share false information just to gain web traffic. For example, a fintech startup may exaggerate the amount of money it has processed just to attract more customers. Also, when we mentioned the issue of maybe outdated, some of the data sources are outdated and there are no new available data to replace the old ones. For example, the national census is not usually updated yearly. Therefore, there have been changes in the country's population since the last census. However, someone working with the country's population will have to settle for the previous recorded figure, even though it's outdated. So we've got a summary. So market research data, facts and figures collected and analysed in the table there. Secondary data is public existing information collected by others. As we mentioned earlier, government statistics, industry associations, trade publications, company websites, and market research reports. And you need to make sure that these the information, the data you've collected is authentic. Primary data, new information collected directly, in-depth interviews, surveys, focus groups, and social media monitoring. So we've got primary and secondary data. The definition of primary data is first-hand, and this is just a summary to identify what we've done. First-hand report of a study, experiment, procedure, or event. The elements are the population, intervention, instruments, results, methods, implications, and conclusions. And the examples: clinical trials, cohort, RCT, CCT, randomized control trial, and study. For secondary research, it's analyzes and interprets studies, events, or procedures. As we went through the different types of secondary research and the different types of primary research, so you'll have a better idea of that. The elements of that is review, analyzes, parameters of included studies, table list of studies, procedures, and interventions. The examples are systematic review, meta-analysis, meta-synthesis, and reviews and opinions in regards to this. So from the video, we identified the different types of primary research and secondary research, and which was the most popular one to use for students is mainly secondary research, because sometimes it's difficult to do first-hand interviews and things like that. And to conclude and summarize this session, secondary data has various uses in research, business, and statistics. Researchers choose secondary data for different reasons, with some of it being due to price, availability, or even needs of the research. Although all secondary data may be the only source of data in some cases, for example, if you're researching anything about the history, or if you're researching something about the law relating to domestic violence, you might not be able to get new information as there's no new laws in place. This may be due to the huge cost of performing research, or due to its delegation to a particular body, so national census, as we mentioned earlier. In short, secondary data has its shortcomings, which may affect the outcome of the research negativity, and also some advantages over primary data. It all depends on the situation, the researcher in question, and the kind of research is being carried out. So, you know, there is a difference between primary and secondary research. Depending on what research you do, it would depend on what source you use, primary or secondary. But the elements are there, and, you know, the idea of using both sources it has its advantages and disadvantages for both primary and secondary. Thank you for attending today's session, and we finished the session. That's all for today. And the next session I will see you in would be to do learning outcome 3, which is to be able to take effective notes from a variety of sources. So thank you for attending today's session. And thank you for your patience.